The late autumn air hung heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth and fading leaves, as though the world carried the weight of unshed tears. Elara Quinn stood at the edge of the city square, clutching her coat tighter around her frame, her eyes fixed on the figure before her. Adrian Voss stood tall, immaculate in a suit that reflected his wealth and the iron walls he had built around his heart. His expression was stern, though in the corners of his gaze lingered something fragile, something he refused to let surface. She had once known those eyes as the source of her joy. They had once looked at her like she was the only light in a world built on shadows. But now, they were cold, distant, rehearsed. Adrian's voice, low and deliberate, cut through the brittle silence between them. "Elara," he said, each syllable a blade. "This cannot continue." The words struck her like the first blow of a storm. She had anticipated many things from him: hesitation, anger, despair, but not this icy finality. Her fingers, trembling inside the folds of her coat, instinctively reached for the silver bracelet on her wrist, which he had given her 2 years ago earlier, when promises had still been sacred. "You mean us," she whispered, though her throat tightened against the words. "Yes," he answered, unflinching. "My family will never accept you. They've already threatened to disinherit me. You don't know the forces we are up against, Elara. I cannot throw away everything I've built." Her heart stuttered. For months she had sensed the shifting tides, the silences that stretched too long, the rehearsed excuses, and the meetings that always pulled him away. But still, some part of her had clung to hope that the man who once kissed her forehead beneath the glow of city lights would fight for them. For her. For the life they had imagined together. "And what about me?" she asked, her voice breaking.
"What about us?" Adrian's jaw tightened. His hand moved as though to reach for her, then stopped midway and fell limply to his side. "You'll survive," he muttered, though the pain in his tone betrayed him. "You've always been stronger than you think." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Stronger because I had to be," she said. "Stronger because you never understood what it meant to stand without safety nets, wealth, or a name that opens doors. You loved me when it was easy, Adrian, but now, when it matters most, you choose them over me." The rain began to fall, slow drops at first, then harder, drumming against the stone pavement like an unrelenting verdict. Her tears mingled with the storm, indistinguishable, yet heavier than any rain could ever be. "I'm sorry," Adrian said, but his apology was hollow, a string of letters with no life. He turned away, his figure blurring in the downpour, leaving her in the square with nothing but a memory and a child growing inside her. Elara stood frozen, her hands pressed against her stomach, as though shielding the fragile heartbeat she carried within. She whispered into the storm, a vow no thunder could drown. "You may leave us, Adrian, but this child will never be unwanted. I will fight for us. I will survive, even if it breaks me." The months that followed were unforgiving. Elara's small apartment became both a sanctuary and a prison. The days stretched long with endless work, her body heavy with new life and old sorrow. She took shifts at the bookstore during the day and cleaned offices in the evenings to make ends meet. Exhaustion pressed down on her each night, but she would rest her hand over her stomach and speak softly to the little one within. "Kaia," she said one night, though she had not yet decided on the name. It simply came to her, like a whisper carried by fate. "You will know love, no matter what it costs me." She remembered vividly the night of the storm when Kaia entered the world. The power had gone out, and the midwife lit candles that cast flickering shadows on the walls. The screams of labor were muffled by the roar of the wind against the windows. Yet in that chaos, when Kaia's first cry split the night, Elara felt a peace deeper than anything she had ever known. She held her daughter close, kissed her damp hair, and vowed again, silently and fiercely, that no absence could ever eclipse the presence of her love. Still, the wound of the past never fully healed. Each time she saw a headline about Adrian Voss, his company's rise, his fortune multiplying, his name spoken with reverence in financial circles, the scar throbbed. Not because she longed for his wealth or power, but because she knew what he had abandoned. She knew he walked in gilded halls, surrounded by admiration,
while never knowing the warmth of the daughter who bore his eyes and smile. Elara raised Kaia with stories not of pain, but of hope. She told her daughter she was born of strength, that her life was a testament to resilience. She never once spoke Adrian's name, not because she hated him, but because she refused to let bitterness shape Kaia's childhood. But in the quiet moments, when Kaia was asleep and the night folded around the city, Elara would take out the letters. Dozens of them, written in her careful hand, addressed to Adrian but never sent. Letters filled with anger, grief, pleas, and confessions. She tucked them into a box, hidden beneath the floorboards, as though burying pieces of herself that the world must never see. Years passed, and Kaia became a brilliant and determined young woman. She excelled in her studies, her mind sharp and her heart steady. She carried herself with a confidence that seemed to defy her modest beginnings. Elara often marveled at her daughter, seeing both the fire of her own struggles and the shadow of Adrian's ambition. Yet even as she celebrated Kaia's triumphs, the wound of the past lingered. It whispered in the silence, reminding Elara that though she had survived and built a life from ashes, an unfinished story remained. A reckoning waiting in the distance. And so, as another autumn settled over the city, Elara stood again at a crossroads she had not chosen. The gala loomed on the horizon, an invitation addressed not to her but to Kaia. A stage set for brilliance, recognition, and a young woman to shine before industry titans. Among them, Adrian Voss, still towering, still untouchable, still unaware that the blood of his blood would soon stand in the spotlight before him. Elara's heart ached with dread and anticipation. The wound of the past had never closed. But now it threatened to bleed again, not for her alone, but for the daughter who would soon walk into the storm she had shielded her from all her life. And a question whispered somewhere deep within, beneath the layers of resolve and fear, could a wound so old ever truly heal if the truth remained unspoken? The night Kaia Quinn entered the world was wrapped in a storm that seemed determined to shake the earth apart. The wind howled like a creature wounded, rattling the window panes of the small apartment where Elara labored, her breath coming in jagged gasps. The city outside drowned in darkness as the power failed, plunging streets into silence except for the relentless roar of rain against concrete. Candles flickered across the modest room, their flames bending under invisible currents, painting long, trembling shadows on the peeling walls. Elara clutched the sheets as another wave of pain crashed through her, her knuckles white as bone. The midwife, a neighbor woman with kind eyes and steady hands, urged her on with a quiet strength. "Breathe, Elara. Breathe and push. You are stronger than this storm." The words were steady anchors, but the memory of Adrian's last glance in the square haunted her even in these raw moments. His absence was louder than the thunder outside, a silence that pressed against her ribs and made every contraction feel sharper. She remembered his promise whispered in better days, how he had held her and spoken of futures filled with light. She remembered the silver bracelet now tucked in the drawer by her bedside. But promises, like storms, could break without warning. With one final cry, fierce and guttural, the silence of the night was broken by the thin, desperate wail of a newborn. The midwife lifted the child, wrapped her quickly in a towel, and placed her on Elara's chest. The storm seemed to soften at that moment, as if the heavens themselves paused to honor the fragile cry that filled the room. Elara gazed down at her daughter, her face damp with sweat and tears, and for the first time in many months, her heart expanded with something that was not pain. "Kaia," she whispered, naming the child as if the name had waited in her soul all along. "My light in the storm." Kaia's tiny fingers curled instinctively, clinging to Elara's skin, and in that touch was a vow stronger than any Adrian could have ever spoken. Elara knew she was no longer just herself. She was a mother, protector, guardian of a future untold. The storm outside could rage forever, but she had something now worth braving every tempest. The days after the birth were a blur of exhaustion and fierce devotion. The apartment, once a place of loneliness, now throbbed with the fragile rhythm of a newborn's breathing. Nights were long, sleepless hours, filled with lullabies whispered into the dark. Elara walked the narrow floor with Kaia in her arms, her body aching, but her spirit anchored in love. She would look at her daughter's face and see fragments of Adrian. The curve of her jaw, the shape of her eyes. Each resemblance was a sting, but also a strange kind of solace. The midwife returned often, bringing soup and words of encouragement. "You're doing well," she said, watching Elara feed Kaia by the window where the storm had once raged. "Some men leave, but children, they are the ones who stay. And this little one will stay with you all your life." Elara smiled faintly, though her heart tightened with unspoken truth. She had no intention of letting Adrian know. She would not beg him to share this journey. She would not gift him the power to rewind her. Whatever burden came, she would shoulder it alone. Money was always thin, stretched to breaking, bills piled up like ghosts on the table. Elara returned to work sooner than she should have, leaving Kaia in the care of her neighbor during shifts at the bookstore. At night, she cleaned offices downtown, her body aching, her spirit worn. Still, she always came home to Kaia, who would smile up at her with eyes that seemed far too wise for an infant. Those smiles healed wounds better than time ever could. As months turned to years, the storm of Kaia's birth became a story Elara carried inside her, a private legend that marked the beginning of their life together. She would sit by the window when thunder rolled through the city and whisper to her daughter, "You came to me in the storm, and no storm will ever take you away." Kaia grew quickly, her laughter filling corners once hollow. She was curious, fearless, and bright. She stumbled across the wooden floors chasing sunlight, asked questions before she could pronounce them correctly, and painted their small world with joy. Each birthday, Elara celebrated with humble cakes and handmade gifts, and though the parties were simple, Kaia's eyes always sparkled as if she were the richest child alive. But the world was not always kind. At school, whispers followed Kaia when other children asked about her father. She would return home with questions Elara dreaded. "Why don't I have a dad like them? Why don't we live in a house like theirs?" Elara's throat would tighten, but she always answered with truth, softened by love. "Because we have something better, Kaia. We have each other, and that is enough." Yet, at night, when Kaia slept, Elara would sit by the flickering lamp and write. She poured her heart into letters addressed to Adrian, letters she never intended to send. Letters filled with the milestones he missed, the laughter he never heard, the tears he never wiped away. She wrote of Kaia's first steps, her first words, the way she hugged her mother's neck with a love fierce enough to heal any wound. She wrote of her own struggles, the nights she cried quietly so Kaia would never see. Those letters were piled high in the wooden box beneath the floorboards. They became both a burden and a release, a reminder that the storm of Kaia's birth had not only given her light, but also left her with scars. When Kaia turned 10, a particularly harsh winter struck the city. The heating bills doubled, and Elara worked herself to sickness. One night, he collapsed on the floor while cleaning an office building, her body refusing to rise. A janitor found her and rushed her to the clinic, where she spent days recovering. Through it all, Kaia stayed by her side, holding her hand, her young eyes filled with worry that no child should carry. It was then that Elara realized that Kaia had inherited her mother's resilience and her father's steel. She saw the makings of someone who could stand unbroken in the face of any storm in her daughter. And yet, she also feared what would happen if Kaia one day discovered the truth, that the man she resembled, the man who had given her half her blood, had walked away before she took her first breath. Years passed. Kaia's brilliance became undeniable. She excelled in her studies, earned scholarships, and drew the attention of mentors who recognized her potential. She spoke confidently, carried herself with poise, and dreamed of building a future larger than the walls of their apartment. Elara watched with pride, knowing that the storm that had once threatened to destroy her had given birth to a force of nature more potent than the winds that had howled that night. Still, the past lingered. Each success Kaia achieved was shadowed by Elara's fear of the day destiny would pull Adrian back into their orbit. She knew the world was small, and powerful men like Adrian cast long shadows. She dreaded the moment Kaia might step into one and discover the truth hidden all her life. But for now, Elara allowed herself to breathe. One evening, she sat by the window as Kaia worked on a school project at the table. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass, soft and golden. The storm had long passed, but its memory was etched into her soul. She smoothed Kaia's hair, whispering,
"You are my storm child, and you are my miracle." Kaia looked up with a grin, unaware of the weight carried in those words, and the night once again filled with a laughter strong enough to silence the ghosts of the past. The years unfolded slowly, each one layering hardship and triumph upon the life Elara Quinn had built for her daughter. The city itself seemed to conspire against her at times, its towering glass buildings mocking her modest apartment, its bustling streets filled with men and women who seemed to glide effortlessly through a world she was forever fighting to survive in. Yet in that daily battle, Elara discovered a strength she had never known she possessed. Her mornings began before dawn, when the streets still carried the hush of night, and only the hum of delivery trucks broke the silence.
She would prepare a simple breakfast for Kaia, leaving notes of encouragement tucked beside her daughter's plate before rushing off to her first job. By day, she worked at the bookstore, its shelves lined with the wisdom of others, its air thick with the musty perfume of old pages. Customers came and went, their lives untouched by the quiet struggle of the woman who rang up their purchases with a weary but polite smile. When evening descended, Elara transformed from clerk to cleaner. The offices she entered were pristine, cold places of power and wealth that reminded her of Adrian's world. She scrubbed floors, dusted desks, and emptied bins, each task a reminder of what she had lost and what she was determined to build anew. There, under fluorescent lights and the hum of vending machines, she often felt the ache of exhaustion pressing hardest against her bones. But no matter how drained she felt, Elara never allowed her fatigue to show when she returned home. Kaia was always waiting, bright-eyed and eager to share the stories of her day. Sometimes it was a drawing she had made in school. Other times it was a tale of standing up for a friend or earning praise from a teacher. Elara listened to it all with a smile, her heart swelling with pride. Kaia's childhood was painted not with riches, but with resilience. She grew up watching her mother fight for every scrap of stability. And in those battles, she found inspiration. She learned early the value of work, the dignity in effort, and the unshakable bond between mother and daughter. While other children boasted about expensive toys or family trips, Kaia found her joy in books borrowed from the library, in late-night conversations with her mother, in birthday cakes baked from scratch with love rather than perfection. Elara did her best to shield her daughter from the shadows of the past, but the questions came nonetheless. One evening, as Kaia sat cross-legged on the floor surrounded by colored pencils, she looked up and asked, "Mama, why don't I have a father like my friends?" The question pierced Elara like a blade, though she had long prepared for it. She set down the dish she was drying and knelt beside her daughter. "Because sometimes people are not brave enough to stay," she said softly. "But you and I are brave enough to face the world together. And that is more than enough." Kaia nodded, satisfied for the moment, and returned to her drawing. Elara watched her, wondering how long those answers would suffice before the truth demanded to be known. Despite the hardship, there were moments of light. On weekends, when Elara managed to carve out a few free hours, she and Kaia would explore the city's hidden corners. They wandered through second-hand shops, where Kaia marveled at trinkets from forgotten times. They strolled through parks where music drifted from street performers, Kaia's laughter mingling with the melody. These were the memories Elara cherished most, fragments of happiness stitched into the fabric of their complicated lives. And always, when Kaia was asleep at night, Elara returned to her ritual. She pulled the wooden box from its hiding place and added another letter. Sometimes it was a furious scrawl about Adrian's abandonment. Other times it was tender, almost forgiving, and described the small miracles of Kaia's life. She never sent them, never would, but writing them kept her from drowning in silence. The letters became both her confession and her shield. Kaia grew quickly into adolescence, her intelligence unmistakable. Teachers praised her, mentors encouraged her, and scholarships began to open doors that Elara had only dreamed of. Kaia's ambition was boundless, her curiosity insatiable. She often spoke of building something of her own, creating change in a world that too frequently overlooked people like her mother. Elara nurtured those dreams with everything she had. She worked extra shifts to afford the programs and competitions Kaia longed to enter. She stitched old clothes to make them presentable for essential events. She sacrificed without hesitation, because she knew that Kaia was not just her daughter, but the embodiment of every hope she had clung to through the storms. Yet even as she celebrated Kaia's triumphs, Elara felt the shadow of Adrian's absence stretching longer. Each accolade Kaia earned, each stage she stood upon, carried the risk of crossing paths with the man who had once abandoned them. The thought filled Elara with both dread and defiance. She would never allow him to harm Kaia, as he had harmed her. But she also feared what truth would do to her daughter when it finally came crashing into their carefully built world. One night, as rain tapped softly against the window, Elara sat by Kaia's bedside and watched her sleep. The girl's features had sharpened, the innocence of childhood giving way to the grace of young adulthood. She looked so much like Adrian in that moment that Elara's breath caught in her throat. The resemblance was undeniable. The same curve of the jaw, the same intensity resting even in slumber. Elara whispered into the dark, a promise only the night could hear. "I will protect you, Kaia. From him, from the past, from everything that could steal your light." But deep down, she knew the past was not something she could shield her daughter from forever. It lingered, waiting, a wound unhealed, a secret unsaid. One day, Kaia would demand answers. One day, Adrian would discover what he had lost. One day, the fragile peace Elara had fought so hard to build would be tested by truths too powerful to bury. Until that day, Elara clung to the resilience she had forged in fire and storm. She woke each morning ready to fight, sacrifice, and love again. With the fierceness of a woman who had nothing left to lose except the child who was her entire world. And so the years passed, each one a chapter in the story of survival and love. A story not yet finished, not yet tested by the reckoning ahead. Though Elara had endured much, she sensed that her greatest trial was still to come, waiting just beyond the horizon, where Kaia's future and Adrian's shadow would one day collide. The years that carried Kaia Quinn from adolescence into young adulthood moved with the quiet inevitability of a tide. Each wave of time brought with it change, carving away the remnants of childhood and shaping her into someone formidable. By the time she stood on the edge of her 18th year, the girl who once clutched her mother's hand in crowded classrooms had transformed into a woman whose presence drew notice wherever she went. Kaia's brilliance was no accident. It had been cultivated in the soil of hardship, watered by her mother's sacrifices, and strengthened by every whispered promise that Elara had made in the darkest nights. The world might have denied her privilege, but it had not rejected her determination. From her earliest days in school, Kaia had sought not only to learn, but to excel. She competed fiercely, pushing herself beyond expectation, her hunger for knowledge burning brighter than any fear of failure. Her teachers saw in her something rare. She was not simply intelligent, she was relentless. When told a problem had no solution, she worked until she found one. When a door was said to be closed, she built her own path through. This drive earned her scholarships and invitations to programs that few from her background ever experienced. Yet even as accolades accumulated, Kaia never carried herself with arrogance. She wore her achievements lightly, as though they were less about her and more about proving the strength of the mother who had raised her. Elara often watched from the shadows of auditoriums and classrooms, her heart swelling with pride and trembling with fear. Pride, because her daughter's light shone brighter than anything she had dared imagine. Fear, because she knew how unforgiving the world of power could be. She recognized in Kaia the same fire that once burned in Adrian. That fire had led Elara into love and heartbreak. What would it lead her daughter into? By 16, Kaia had founded a small startup with 2 classmates. It began as a school project, an initiative to connect local artisans with online buyers. But where others saw only a grade, Kaia saw potential. She poured her energy into it, precisely navigating contracts and logistics that impressed even seasoned business mentors. Within a year, the project had grown beyond expectations. The platform attracted investors, and Kaia stood in meetings where her age was questioned, but her vision was not. Elara stood beside her through it all, silent support in the background. She ironed Kaia's shirts before presentations, ensured her daughter ate before long work nights, and listened when doubts crept in. "You belong in every room you enter," she would say, brushing Kaia's hair back from her face. "Never let anyone make you believe otherwise." Kaia took those words into her bones. She began to carry herself with the confidence of someone who knew her worth, her posture straight, her voice steady. She learned how to silence those who underestimated her, not with anger, but with results. Each success added another brick to the foundation she was building, a structure meant not only to hold her dreams, but also to honor her mother's struggles. During this time, an invitation arrived, gilded in elegance and heavy with significance. Voss Group, one of the most powerful investment firms in the country, was hosting an annual gala, a celebration of innovation and entrepreneurship. Kaia had been selected to present her startup before an audience of investors, CEOs, and magnates who shaped the financial world. The letter shimmered in her hands, her eyes wide as she read and reread it. "Mama, they want me to speak. They want me to stand on their stage." Elara's hands trembled as she held the invitation. The name at the top struck her like a ghost risen from the past. Voss Group, Adrian's empire. The name she had avoided uttering for nearly 2 decades loomed over her like an omen. "Are you sure you want this, Kaia?" she asked carefully, though her voice betrayed her unease. Kaia's gaze was unwavering. "I have worked for this. I will not step back because of fear. You always told me to take every chance. This is one I cannot waste." Elara said nothing more, though her chest ached with unspoken warnings. She knew she could not cage her daughter with the ghosts of her own past. Kaia had earned this stage. She would not be the one to take it away. The weeks leading up to the gala were filled with preparation. Kaia refined her presentation until every word flowed with precision. She practiced late into the night, her voice echoing through their apartment, her gestures confident and controlled. Mentors praised her clarity and ability to inspire. Reporters began to notice their headlines painting her as a rising star in the world of entrepreneurship. Yet beneath her composure, Kaia carried the weight of expectation. She knew this was more than a speech. It was a chance to prove herself, to claim her place in a world that had not been built for people like her. She wanted to succeed and shine so brightly that no one could ever question where she belonged. Elara watched with quiet sorrow. She saw the reflection of Adrian's ambition in her daughter, the hunger that had once captivated her. But she also saw something Adrian never possessed, the compassion that tempered the fire, the love that guided each choice. Kaia was not him, she was more. The night of the gala arrived like a storm waiting to break. The venue was a cathedral of glass and steel, glittering with chandeliers and echoing with the hum of wealth. Guests in tailored suits and flowing gowns filled the room, their conversations a chorus of influence and power. Kaia stood backstage, her hands steady, her heart pounding. She wore a dress chosen carefully for its elegance and strength, her hair pulled back to reveal a face that glowed with determination. Elara sat in the audience, her heart a battlefield of pride and dread. And then the announcement came. Please welcome Kaia Quinn, founder of Artisan Connect and a rising leader in social entrepreneurship, to the stage. Applause filled the hall as Kaia stepped into the light. For a moment she paused, her gaze sweeping the audience. And there, seated among the titans of industry, was Adrian Voss. His presence struck her like a thunderclap, though she did not know who he truly was. She only felt the weight of his eyes, sharp and calculating, fixed upon her. Elara's breath caught. The past and present had collided in this moment. She could feel the tremor of destiny shaking the ground beneath them. Kaia stood poised on the edge of revelation, her brilliance illuminating the stage that would soon unravel the secrets Elara had spent years burying. Kaia began to speak, her voice clear, her words carrying across the hall with conviction. She spoke of resilience, community, and building bridges where walls once stood. The audience listened, captivated, as the young woman wove her vision into reality. But as Adrian leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with recognition, Elara knew that the storm she had feared for 18 years was no longer distant. It had arrived, and its force would sweep them all into a future none were prepared to face. The air in the grand ballroom shimmered with a tension that only gatherings of immense wealth and influence could conjure. Crystal chandeliers spilled light across marble floors polished to a mirror's sheen. and laughter mingled with the clinking of glasses as investors and executives exchanged words sharpened with ambition. At the center of it all stood a stage draped in velvet, a place where futures would be decided by those bold enough to claim the microphone. Kaia Quinn stood there now, the young woman whose presence was already disrupting the established order. She was not from their world of inherited power or gilded legacies. She was from the narrow apartment above a grocer's shop, from nights of her mother's weary hands and whispered lullabies. Yet she held herself with the grace of someone born to stand beneath the spotlight, her shoulders squared, her voice steady as she addressed the sea of eyes before her. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her tone clear and deliberate. "We live in an age where opportunity is too often dictated by wealth rather than potential. But what if we could change that? What if we could use technology not to widen the gap, but to close it?" A murmur swept through the audience, curiosity stirring. She clicked the small remote in her hand, and behind her, the screen came alive with images of artisans and craftspeople from corners of the country often overlooked by investors. Their hands were calloused, their tools simple, but their creations radiated skill and heritage. "My company, Artisan Connect, is built on a simple vision," Kaia continued. "To give voice and visibility to those who have long been unseen. To create a platform where craftsmanship meets global demand. Where tradition is not lost to time, but given new life through modern opportunity." Applause broke out, polite at first, then stronger as her conviction seeped into the room. Kaia moved across the stage with confidence that belied her age, weaving numbers and narratives into a tapestry of hope and practicality. She was not merely pitching a company, but inviting them to believe in a movement. In the front rows, Elara Quinn sat with her hands clenched in her lap, her eyes never leaving her daughter. Pride surged through her, so fierce it made her chest ache. But fear laced it, sharp and cold. Across the aisle, at the center of power, sat Adrian Voss. He had arrived late, slipping into his seat with the practiced grace of a man who knew that every movement he made was observed. His empire was stamped into every detail of the gala, from the embossed programs to the staff uniforms, and yet he looked slightly detached, as though all of this were mere theater. But when Kaia stepped onto the stage, his detachment cracked. He leaned forward, his gaze narrowing as he studied the young woman speaking with such fire. Something in the set of her jaw, in the intensity of her eyes, reached through the years and struck him like a blow. Memories he had long buried flickered to life. A stormy night, a silver bracelet, a woman's voice breaking with betrayal. Adrian's breath caught as the recognition settled, slow and undeniable. He knew those eyes because they were his own. He knew that face because it echoed the woman he had once loved and abandoned. His hand trembled slightly, but he quickly steadied the glass of wine. No one around him noticed the shift, but inside, the foundations of his carefully built life began to quake. On stage, Kaia's presentation reached its crescendo. She spoke of investors already showing interest, the exponential growth her model promised, and the cultural preservation it encouraged. She ended not with a plea, but with a challenge. Will you be the ones to join us? Will you be the ones to invest not only in profit, but in people? Because if you will not, others will. The room erupted in applause, louder, genuine admiration surging like a wave. Kaia bowed her head slightly, her expression calm though her heart thundered with exhilaration. She had done it. She had stood before the giants and made them listen. But as she stepped from the stage, her eyes brushed against Adrian's. She did not know who he was, but the intensity of his gaze unsettled her. It was as though he looked through her, not at her, as though he carried some secret only he could see. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. She recognized the look in Adrian's eyes, the dawning realization, the storm that brewed behind his composed exterior. She had feared this moment for 18 years, dreaded the day their paths would cross again. And now it was here, unavoidable, unstoppable. The applause still echoed through the ballroom as Kaia returned to her seat, radiant with accomplishment. Investors leaned toward one another, whispering about the young entrepreneur who had captured their attention. But Elara heard none of it. She heard only the silent thunder in Adrian's gaze, the unspoken claim forming in his mind. He would not remain silent for long. She knew him too well for that. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Kaia was approached by journalists eager for quotes, by business leaders offering their cards, by mentors praising her clarity. She accepted it all with composure, though inside she was overwhelmed. Elara remained close, her protective presence a shield against the tide of attention. Adrian did not approach them immediately. He stayed in his seat, watching, calculating, the mask of the powerful CEO slipping back into place. But his mind was consumed, torn between the present and the past, between the empire he commanded and the truth that now stood before him. When the gala finally began to wind down, when guests drifted toward exits and the echo of laughter softened, Adrian rose. His tall frame cut through the thinning crowd with an authority that turned heads. He moved not as a man unsure, but as one who had decided on a course of action. Elara felt her stomach twist as he approached. She took Kaia's hand instinctively, though her daughter looked at her confusedly. "Is something wrong, Mama?" Kaia whispered. Before Elara could answer, Adrian Voss stood before them. His eyes lingered on Kaia, searching, confirming, aching. Then they shifted to Elara, and for a moment, time folded back 18 years. The storm, the goodbye, the wound that had never closed. "Elara," he said softly, though his voice still carried the weight of command. Kaia glanced between them, startled. "You know my mother?" The silence followed was heavy, filled with truths long buried and revelations about to erupt. The stage meant for Kaia's triumph had transformed into a stage of destiny, where past and present collided with the force of inevitability. And as Adrian opened his mouth to speak, Elara knew the life she had fought so fiercely to protect was about to be torn open, exposed to the storm she had spent 18 years outrunning. The ballroom emptied slowly, guests trailing into the velvet night, their laughter echoing faintly against the marble columns. Yet, in the center of the room, under the waning glow of the chandeliers, 3 people stood locked in a silence that felt heavier than any thunderstorm. Adrian Voss had spoken Elara's name, and with that single word the past had broken through 18 years of a fragile peace. Flushed from triumph on the stage, Kaia Quinn looked at the man before her with confusion. He was tall and commanding, his tailored suit was a second skin, and his eyes were sharp as though they carried the weight of entire empires. She had seen him before in magazines and on television, and his name was synonymous with power and ruthless success. Adrian Voss, the architect of wealth, the man whose signature shaped markets. But what unsettled her was not his reputation, how he looked at her, not as an investor or a stranger, but as though she were the missing piece of a puzzle he had lost long ago. Elara's grip tightened on her daughter's hand. She wanted to pull Kaia away, to vanish into the shadows before the words could form, before the truth could rise like a tide. But Adrian's voice came again, low, steady, and undeniable. "She is mine," he said, though not loudly. The words were meant only for Elara, but Kaia heard them too, and her heart stumbled against her ribs. "Yours?" Kaia repeated, her voice a whisper of disbelief. She turned to her mother, eyes wide, demanding an explanation. "What does he mean, Mama?" Elara's throat burned with the weight of everything she had never said. She had rehearsed these conversations in the dark, had written them in letters that were never sent, had imagined Kaia's face when the truth came crashing in. But now, with her daughter standing between the man who had abandoned them and the storm of revelation, her carefully guarded silence shattered. "He is your father," Elara whispered, her voice breaking on the word. The world seemed to tilt. Kaia staggered back, her hands slipping from her mother's grasp. She stared at Adrian, then at Elara, her mind reeling. "My father? You mean this man? The man who has been on the covers of magazines? The one building towers in cities I've never seen? You kept this from me?" Elara's eyes brimmed with tears. I wanted to protect you, Kaia. I wanted you to grow without his shadow, without the pain of knowing you were abandoned before you ever took your first breath. Adrian stepped forward, his face taut with emotion. I didn't know. I swear to you, Kaia, I didn't know you existed. Elara never told me. That is a lie, Elara snapped, her voice sharp now, fury cutting through her sorrow. I wrote you letters, Adrian, dozens of them. I begged you to acknowledge us. I begged you to come back. You chose silence. You chose them over us. Adrian's jaw clenched, memories of those years pressing down on him like a stone. He remembered the pressure from his family, the threats of ruin, the weight of expectations. He had convinced himself that leaving Elara was survival, but now, staring into Kaia's face, into the mirror of his own eyes, he realized what survival had cost him. Kaia shook her head, the ground beneath her seeming to crumble. All these years I thought my father was dead or gone. I thought maybe he was a man you loved once, but lost. But you are telling me he abandoned us? That you knew and did nothing? She looked at Elara, betrayal raw in her voice. And you, Mama, you let me grow up never knowing. You decided for me. The tears finally spilled from Elara's eyes, because I was afraid. I was afraid he would take you from me, afraid he would crush you under the weight of his world. I gave you love, Kaia. I gave you everything I could. The young woman stepped back, her chest heaving, her gaze swinging between them. The triumph of the evening was gone, replaced by a storm of questions, anger, and loss. She wanted to run, to hide, but the ballroom walls closed around her like a trap. Adrian reached out, his voice breaking in a way few had ever heard. Kaia, I am sorry. I cannot undo the past, but will not walk away now, not again. You are my daughter. You deserve to know that I am here. Kaia flinched from his hand, her voice laced with bitterness. Where were you when Mama worked herself sick to pay the bills? Where were you when I asked why I didn't have a father? Where were you on my birthdays, on the nights I cried because I thought maybe I was unwanted? You cannot just appear now and claim me because you recognize your eyes in my face. Her words sliced through the air, and for once Adrian Voss, the man who commanded boardrooms and bent markets to his will, had no reply. He stood frozen, undone by the truth spoken by the daughter he had never known. Elara moved toward Kaia, her voice trembling. Please, Kaia, do not let him steal the love we've built. Do not let his return take away what we are. But Kaia could not hear her. She felt as though the world had betrayed her, both parents complicit in different ways, one by leaving, the other by hiding. She turned sharply and fled, the ballroom doors swinging open as her footsteps echoed into the night. Elara started after her, but Adrian caught her wrist. Let her go, he said, his voice hoarse. Elara wrenched free, fire blazing in her eyes. You have no right to tell me what to do. You lost that right when you walked away 18 years ago. He looked at her, his face shadowed by regret. I lost everything that night. I see that now. Elara's heart ached, torn between the fury she carried and the grief of watching Kaia run into the night. You may have built towers and empires, Adrian, but you will never understand the price of raising a child alone. And you will never undo the pain you caused. She turned and followed her daughter, her steps quick and desperate. Adrian remained behind, alone in the vast emptiness of the ballroom, the applause of earlier, now nothing more than an echo mocking him. He had faced rivals, crises, and battles that had tested his empire. But nothing had shaken him like the look in his daughter's eyes. The look that told him no wealth could mend what had been broken. Outside, the night swallowed Kaia's figure as she disappeared down the rain-slicked streets. Elara called after her, but the storm of betrayal in her daughter's heart was louder than any voice. For the first time in her life, Kaia felt truly alone, adrift between the mother who had protected her with silence and the father who had abandoned her with cowardice. The secret was no longer hidden. It had been unveiled in the harshest light, and now none of them could retreat to the safety of ignorance. The truth stood between them, vast and unforgiving, demanding to be faced. And in that truth, a storm far greater than the one that had marked Kaia's birth began to brew. It was not a storm of weather, but of reckoning, of choices long buried rising to claim their due. And none of them, Elara, Adrian, or Kaia, would escape untouched. The city outside was still humming with the aftermath of the gala, cars gliding through wet streets, neon lights bleeding into puddles. Inside their small apartment, however, the night was silent except for the soft tick of a clock on the wall. Elara Quinn sat on the worn couch, her hands clasped so tightly they trembled. She had searched for Kaia until exhaustion forced her home, praying that her daughter would return on her own. It was past midnight when the door finally creaked open. Kaia stepped inside, her hair damp from the drizzle, her face pale but set in hard lines. She did not look at her mother as she crossed the room and put her bag on the table. Elara rose instantly, her voice breaking with relief. "Kaia, thank God. I was so worried. I thought." Kaia lifted a hand, cutting her off. "Don't." Elara froze. The sharpness in her daughter's voice was unlike anything she had ever heard. Kaia turned to face her, and in her eyes burned an anger that seemed older than her years. "You lied to me," Kaia said, her voice low but steady. "You let me grow up believing I had no father, that he was gone or dead or just someone who didn't matter. All this time, you knew. You knew he was out there, living in mansions, building empires, and you said nothing." Elara swallowed, her chest tightening. "I did it to protect you. To protect us." "Adrian, don't call him that," Kaia snapped. "He's my father. My blood. You kept that from me like I didn't deserve to know who I am." Elara stepped closer, desperate to bridge the distance. "You deserve everything, Kaia. That is why I stayed silent. He abandoned us before you were even born. I could not let his rejection poison your childhood." Kaia shook her head, her hands trembling as she pressed them against the table. "You think you spared me, but you robbed me of the choice to know him. You let me build my life on a lie." Her words pierced Elara deeper than any blade. For 18 years, she had believed her silence was an act of love. But now, faced with her daughter's fury, she wondered if she had only been protecting herself from pain she could not bear to relive. "I loved you with everything I had," Elara whispered. "I sacrificed everything so you would never feel unwanted." Kaia's voice cracked, her anger laced with hurt. "And yet I do. Because now I see the truth. He didn't want us, and you didn't trust me enough to handle it." The room seemed to close around them, the heavy silence with words left unsaid. Finally, Kaia turned away, her shoulders stiff. "I need time. I can't look at you right now. I can't breathe in this apartment, knowing you've hidden him from me all my life." Before Elara could reply, Kaia slipped into her room and shut the door. The sound of the latch was quiet but final, and Elara sank back onto the couch, her body trembling. She stared at the silver bracelet on her wrist, the last relic of Adrian, and wondered if all her years of resilience had been for nothing. Across the city, in a penthouse that overlooked the glowing skyline, Adrian Voss poured himself a glass of whiskey and stood by the window. The gala had ended hours ago, but his mind replayed every second of Kaia's presentation, every glance she had given him, every word she had hurled in anger before fleeing. He saw her eyes, his eyes, and felt the truth settle heavier with each passing hour. She was his daughter, his flesh, his blood, and she hated him. For years, Adrian had lived with the belief that he had made the only choice possible, that walking away from Elara had been the price of survival in a world ruled by family wealth and corporate power. He had convinced himself that he was protecting them both from ruin. But now, seeing Kaia and hearing her voice echo with both brilliance and rage, he realized that what he had thought was survival was nothing but cowardice. His phone buzzed with messages from board members and colleagues praising the gala's success, eager to discuss investments sparked by Kaia's speech. To them, she was an opportunity, a rising star who could be courted, perhaps partnered with. But to Adrian, she was the proof of everything he had lost. He set the glass down,
his reflection fractured in the window pane. For the first time in decades, the man who commanded boardrooms and silenced rivals felt powerless. Kaia left the apartment early the next morning, refusing breakfast and conversation. Elara watched from the doorway as her daughter disappeared into the busy street, her posture rigid with defiance. She wanted to run after her, to beg forgiveness, but she knew Kaia needed space. Kaia wandered the city with her thoughts in turmoil. She saw Adrian's face in every headline on the newsstand, heard his name in passing conversations between people in business on the subway.
She hated that he was everywhere, hated that he had stolen her identity before she even knew it. But beneath the fury was something she could not silence: curiosity. Who was this man really? Why had he left? And why, after so many years, did he look at her as though she were the only thing in the room that mattered? Kaia stood at the river's edge that evening, the skyline glittering before her. She pulled a small notebook from her bag and flipped through the pages filled with sketches and ideas for her company. But the lines blurred, replaced by thoughts of Adrian. She remembered the intensity in his eyes, the way his voice had broken when he called her his daughter. She wanted to hate him, to erase him from her mind, but blood was not so easily denied. At the apartment, Elara sat with the wooden box of letters spread across the table. She had hidden them for years, never daring to show Kaia or send them. Each envelope carried a piece of her heart, a record of nights filled with longing, rage, and despair. With Kaia's fury fresh in her memory, she wondered if those letters could be the bridge between them, or the final blow that shattered what little trust remained. She pulled one at random and read her own words from years ago. Adrian, she took her first steps today. You were not there to see her fall and rise again. You were not there to hear her laughter. I hate you for leaving. I hate you for still making me love you. Elara pressed the letter to her chest, her tears staining the paper. She knew the time was coming when Kaia would demand the truth in full, not just pieces spoken through fear. And when that time came, she would have to open the box and let the past speak for itself. Meanwhile, Adrian made a decision. He would not let the silence of the past define him anymore. He would fight for Kaia, even if she rejected him. He would prove that he was more than the man who had left. He began to draft a letter of his own, not written as a CEO but as a father, raw and unguarded. But Kaia was not ready to read letters. She was not prepared to listen. For now, all she could see was betrayal, one from the mother who had hidden the truth, and one from the father who had walked away. The rift of blood had opened, vast and unforgiving, and none knew if it could ever be closed. Yet a fragile thread still bound them together beneath the pain, fury, and anger. It was not love, not yet, but the undeniable pull of blood, a force that would continue to draw them toward one another no matter how much they resisted. And so the storm raged on, not in the skies but in their hearts, each standing on opposite shores of the same river, staring at the distance between them and wondering if they would ever build a bridge strong enough to cross. The Voss family estate stood like a monument to power, its stone walls rising from the manicured grounds with the permanence of a fortress. Generations of wealth and influence were etched into every archway and column, reminders that Adrian Voss was not simply a man but the heir of a dynasty. Yet inside those grand halls, a storm was brewing that rivaled the one tearing through his heart. News of Kaia Quinn had spread quickly after the gala. Whispers traveled through boardrooms, across media outlets, and within the very halls of the estate. A young woman with uncanny resemblance to Adrian had stepped into the spotlight, her brilliance undeniable, her connection to him unmistakable. For years, the Voss family had kept their empire sealed, guarded from scandal. Now, a secret long buried threatened to unravel it all. Adrian sat in his father's study, the heavy oak desk between him and the woman who had once dictated his every choice, Margaret Voss, his mother. Her hair, silver and immaculately styled, framed a face carved from iron discipline. Her eyes, cold and precise, fixed on her son with unyielding judgment. "You cannot allow this girl to disrupt everything we have built," she said, her voice sharp as crystal. "Our name is not a toy to be played with in public. Do you know what the press will do if they discover she is yours?" Adrian leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. "She is mine, and she deserves to be acknowledged." Margaret's lips thinned. "Acknowledged? Do you realize what that would mean? The board will question your judgment. Investors will see weakness. The family's position will be compromised. Do you want to throw decades of work into the fire because of some girl raised outside our world? His voice rose, firm and steady. She is not some girl. She is my daughter, and she is brilliant. She stood on that stage and commanded a room filled with men who had ruled markets for decades.
She did it without our name, without our wealth. She did it because she is extraordinary. Faltered for the first time a flicker of surprise crossing her face. But it hardened again quickly, replaced by disdain. Extraordinary or not, she is a threat. And Elara, Margaret spat the name like a curse. That woman has already poisoned her against you. Do you think Kaia will embrace you as her father? She will use this to destroy you, just as Elara should have destroyed you 18 years ago. Adrian stood abruptly, his voice shaking with anger. Elara did not destroy me. I destroyed myself the night I left her. Do not twist this into her fault. It was my cowardice, my obedience to you and father, that cost me everything. Margaret's expression turned to ice. You call it cowardice, I call it survival. You would not be where you are today if you had defied us. Do not forget, Adrian, that the empire you command rests on the choices we made. Choices you owe us for.
Adrian's fists clenched at his sides, but he remained steady. He had lived his entire life under the weight of this family, their expectations forged into chains. For years he had accepted them, but now Kaia's face haunted him, her voice echoing with accusation and brilliance. For her he could no longer bow. I will not deny her, he said firmly, not to you, the board, or anyone. Margaret rose slowly, her presence commanding despite her age. She stepped closer, her voice a whisper that carried the force of a blade. Then you risk everything. Do not think for a moment that we will allow a girl from nothing, a bastard child, to inherit what generations of Vosses built. If you bring her into this family, you declare war on us. Adrian did not flinch. Then so be it. The words hung in the air like a gunshot, final and irreversible. Margaret's eyes narrowed, and she turned sharply, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she left the study. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving Adrian with the silence of defiance. Meanwhile, Kaia wrestled with her own storm. At school, whispers followed her. Classmates who once looked at her with admiration now looked with envy or suspicion. The media had begun to speculate about her connection to Adrian Voss, their headlines painting her as a scandal waiting to explode. Interviews she had once welcomed now felt like traps, every question circling back to the man she did not want to claim as her father. She buried herself in work, focusing on her company and the artisans who relied on her. But she could not escape the truth even in the late nights of spreadsheets and calls. Blood did not ask for permission. It ran through her veins, undeniable. One evening, she sat across from Elara at the kitchen table, the silence between them heavy. The box of letters lay on the table, finally revealed. Kaia demanded to see them, and Elara relented, her hands trembling as she placed the box in her daughter's care. Kaia leafed through the envelopes, her eyes scanning words written years before she could read. Her mother's handwriting carried rage, sorrow, longing, and love. Each letter was a window into a life she had been denied, a truth hidden to protect her. When she looked up, her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. You suffered so much, alone, and he did nothing. Elara reached across the table, her fingers brushing her daughter's hand. I thought keeping you from him was mercy. I thought sparing you the knowledge of his abandonment was the only way to keep you safe. But I see now, it was a mistake. You deserved to know. You deserved the choice. Kaia closed the box slowly, her expression unreadable. I don't know if I can forgive either of you, but I will not let your mistakes define me. I will decide who I am. At that moment, Adrian stood in his penthouse, staring at the skyline as board members filled the room behind him. They demanded explanations, assurances that his personal scandal would not endanger their empire. He listened in silence, his mind not on their fears, but on his daughter's face.
For the first time, he realized the empire meant nothing if he did not have her. The Voss legacy loomed over them all, a shadow cast by generations of power and control. But Kaia was not born to live in shadows. She was born in a storm, raised in resilience, and destined to challenge everything that had once seemed immovable. And Adrian knew, with a clarity that burned like fire, that if he were to stand beside her, he would have to confront not only his family, but the very foundation of the world he had built. The legacy of the Voss name would no longer be his shield. It would be the battlefield. As the night deepened and the city lights pulsed like restless stars, 3 lives stood at a crossroads: mother, father, daughter, each bound by love, betrayal, and blood. And somewhere in the distance, the first cracks began to form in the walls of the Voss dynasty, cracks that would soon widen into fractures too significant to contain. The rain returned with a steady rhythm that night, striking the window panes of the Quinn apartment as though echoing the storm within. Kaia sat cross-legged on the floor, the wooden box of letters resting before her like a chest of hidden treasure. She had discovered the truth only days before, yet it felt like years had passed, each hour stretching into an eternity of doubt and unanswered questions. She opened another envelope, the paper yellowed with time, the ink smudged slightly where tears had fallen long ago. Her mother's handwriting flowed across the page with aching honesty. Adrian, today she spoke her first word. She said, "Mama," and my heart nearly broke with joy. But you were not here. You do not know the sound of her laughter, the way she clings to me as if I am her whole world. It may be better this way. Maybe she will never know the man who chose silence over love. Still, I write to you because some part of me cannot let go. Kaia read in silence, her chest tightening. The words painted a portrait of the years she had lived but never understood, years where Elara had fought alone, cried alone, and celebrated alone. She felt the weight of those sacrifices pressing down on her, heavier than the truth itself. Elara sat nearby, watching her daughter with anxious eyes. She had wanted to protect Kaia from these letters, from the rawness of her pain. But Kaia had insisted, her voice steady with the demand for truth. Seeing her daughter's face pale in the candlelight, she wondered if she had unleashed more harm than healing. "Why did you keep them?" Kaia asked at last, her voice quiet but sharp. Elara exhaled slowly. "Because I needed to say the words, even if he never heard them. It was my way of surviving, my way of pouring out what I could not carry inside. But I never sent them because I knew it would change nothing. He had already chosen his world, Kaia. I could not let him break us again." Kaia's fingers tightened on the letter. "You say you did it to protect me. But part of me thinks you also did it to protect yourself. You were afraid of what might happen if he knew. You were afraid he would come back and take me away." Elara's eyes filled with tears, but she did not deny it. "Yes, I was terrified. You were my everything. I could not risk losing you, even if it meant you would one day hate me for it." Kaia fell silent, her gaze returning to the letters. She pulled out another, dated years later. "Adrian, she is 10 now. She asked me tonight why she doesn't have a father. I told her she has all she needs with me, but I saw the sadness in her eyes. She wants something I cannot give her. Do you ever think of us? Do you ever wonder what you left behind? Or have you buried us so profoundly that we no longer exist to you?" The words blurred as Kaia blinked back tears. She imagined herself at 10, asking the question that haunted her childhood. She remembered the ache she could never name, the emptiness she could never fill. And now she knew that emptiness had a face, a name, a man alive all along. She closed the letter and placed it back in the box with trembling hands. "He should have known," she whispered. "He should have fought for us." Elara reached for her, but Kaia pulled away. "Don't. I need to be angry. I need to feel this before I can decide what to do." Elara's hand fell back into her lap. She understood. Anger was a wound's first cry. Healing would come later, if it came at all. Meanwhile, across the city, Adrian Voss sat in his office, the skyline glow behind him. In his hands was a single page of his own making, a draft of the letter he had begun the night after the gala. He had rewritten it countless times. The words never enough to bridge the chasm of years. "Kaia, I do not deserve your forgiveness. I do not even deserve your attention. But I need you to know that I see you now. I see what I lost. I see the woman you have become without me, and I am both proud and ashamed. Proud because you are extraordinary. Embarrassed because I had no part in it. If you allow me, I want to know you, not as a CEO or stranger, but as your father. He folded the paper, uncertain if he would ever send it. Words felt too fragile against the fortress of anger in her eyes, yet he could not stop writing. It was the only way he knew how to fight now, not with deals or contracts, but with truth stripped bare. The following week, Kaia found herself standing outside his building.
The glass tower stretched into the clouds, its mirrored surface reflecting the city like a kingdom unto itself. She had not told her mother where she was going. She did not even know why she had come. Curiosity, anger, perhaps the faintest spark of longing, it all drove her to the doors of the man who was both stranger and blood. Inside, she moved through marble halls until she reached his office. The secretary hesitated only briefly before letting her in. Adrian rose from his desk as she entered, his expression torn between hope and fear. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was thick, filled with everything unsaid. Finally, Kaia's voice cut through. "I read the letters," she said. "All of them. She wrote to you for years, and you never answered. Why?" Adrian's throat tightened. "Because I never received them. Elara must have kept them from me. She says she sent them," Kaia countered sharply. He shook his head, anguish in his eyes. "If she had, I would have come.
I swear it. Kaia, I did not know you existed until the gala. That moment on the stage was the first time I realized Kaia studied him, searching for truth in his face. She wanted to believe, but years of silence weighed heavier than his words. You say that now," she said bitterly, "but where were you when it mattered?" Adrian stepped closer, his voice trembling. "I was a coward. I let fear control me. I chose wealth, family, survival over love, and it is the greatest regret of my life. But I am here now, and I will not run again, not from you." Kaia's heart wavered. She saw the cracks in his armor, the vulnerability he hid from the world. Yet the letters still burned in her memory, her mother's tears inked into every page. "You can't erase 18 years, she said, her voice shaking. "No," Adrian admitted, "but I can spend the rest of my life trying to make them matter less." Kaia turned away, her chest heavy. She could not forgive him yet. She did not know if she ever could. But for the first time she imagined a future where the man before her was more than a ghost. Back in the apartment, Elara sat alone, staring at the space where the box of letters had been. She knew Kaia had taken it with her. That may be as it should be. The letters no longer belonged to her. They belonged to the daughter who had lived their truth. As the night deepened, Kaia walked the streets with the box pressed against her chest. The letters were more than words. They were a map of pain and love, of choices made and unmade. They were the past she could not change, but could no longer ignore. And as she looked up at the skyline where her father's empire reached into the clouds, she realized their mistakes would not decide her future, would choose it. But to make those choices, she would have to face both shadows and truths, and find the strength to determine what kind of family she wanted to build from the ruins of the past.
The night was heavy with the weight of unsaid words when Kaia Quinn returned home from her meeting with Adrian Voss. The box of letters still rested in her hands, her grip tight around its edges, as if she feared it might vanish if she let go. Elara Quinn waited in the kitchen, her eyes red from sleeplessness, the faint aroma of tea rising from a mug that had gone cold hours ago. When the door opened, Elara rose immediately, hope flashing across her face. "Kaia," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you came back." Kaia set the box on the table with a thud. "I went to see him." The words struck Elara harder than any blow. She sank back into her chair, her breath catching. "What did he say?" Kaia's eyes were sharp, but they carried exhaustion, too. "He said he never got these." She tapped the box, the sound echoing in the quiet room.
He swears you never sent them." Elara's hands shook. "He's lying." "Is he?" Kaia shot back, her voice rising. "Because these letters, there are dozens. If you wrote and never sent them, you are the liar, Mama. You let me believe my father didn't want me, when maybe you never even gave him the chance." Elara's tears spilled freely now. "You don't understand. He made his choice long before you were born. He left me in the storm. He abandoned us. Why would I hand him another weapon to use against us?" Kaia leaned forward, her jaw clenched. "Because I had the right to know. I had to decide for myself whether I wanted him in my life. You took that from me. You kept me in the dark because you were afraid. And now I don't know if I can trust either of you." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Elara wanted to reach across the table to hold her daughter the way she had when Kaia was small, but she saw the wall now standing between them. It was made not of anger alone, but of betrayal, years in the making.
Across the city, Adrian Voss stood in the boardroom of his empire, facing a wall of men and women who had long believed him untouchable. The board had convened in an emergency session, and their concern was painted on their stern faces. Headlines about his secret daughter had begun to appear in newspapers, speculation spreading like wildfire. One board member leaned forward, his voice clipped. "This girl, Kaia Quinn. Is she yours?" Adrian met their gaze without flinching. "She is." Murmurs broke out across the room, some outraged, others calculating. One woman spoke sharply. "Do you realize the damage this revelation could cause? Investors despise scandal. They will see this as a weakness, a threat to stability." Adrian's voice cut through the noise. "What they see is irrelevant. She is my blood, and I will not deny her." Margaret Voss, his mother, sat at the head of the table, her eyes like daggers. "You are throwing everything away for a girl raised outside this family. Do you think she will be welcomed into our world? Do you think the name Voss will embrace her when she carries none of its legacy?" Adrian turned to her, his face carved with determination. "She is the legacy. She is what none of us could ever be. Self-made, brilliant, unbroken by the weight of this family's chains. If you cannot see that, then it is not she who does not belong, but you." The room fell into stunned silence. Never before had Adrian defied his mother so openly. Margaret's lips tightened, but she said nothing. The fracture in the Voss dynasty had widened, and Adrian had chosen his side. In the apartment, Kaia lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling as the letters replayed in her mind. Her mother's grief, her father's regret, her own confusion. They tangled inside her like threads of a knot too tight to unravel. She wanted to hate them both, yet a part of her longed for reconciliation, for the possibility of something whole. The next morning, Kaia made a choice. She gathered the letters and walked to the park where she had played as a child. The air was crisp, the leaves beginning to turn. She sat on a bench, opening the envelopes one by one, reading them aloud softly as though speaking them into the world for the first time. As she read, she realized these letters were not only about Adrian. They were about Elara, too, about a woman who had fought, bled, and loved with a fierceness that had kept them both alive. Elara's silence had not been only fear, it had been a sacrifice, however flawed. Tears streamed down Kaia's face as she whispered the words. "She wrote these because she loved me more than she hated him." That evening, she returned home. Elara was at the table again, waiting, her face etched with sorrow. Kaia set the box down gently. "I read them all," Kaia said quietly. "I don't forgive you yet, but I understand. And maybe that's the first step." Elara's shoulders shook with relief. She reached for her daughter's hand, and Kaia did not pull away this time. Meanwhile, Adrian stood alone in his penthouse, staring at a framed photo of his younger self at a corporate event, his smile hollow, his eyes empty. He set it aside and replaced it with the draft of the letter he had written to Kaia. For once, his life was no longer about mergers or markets. It was about a daughter who carried his blood and a chance, however fragile, to rebuild what he had destroyed. The confrontation of truth had begun. Secrets were no longer buried, lies no longer shielded them.
Now came the test of whether love, fractured and scarred, could survive the storm that truth had unleashed. For Kaia, Elara, and Adrian, there was no going back. The past had risen, and the future would be shaped not by what had been hidden, but by what they chose to face together or apart. And as night fell across the city, the three of them, though in different places, shared the same thought, unspoken but alive, that truth, however painful, was the only foundation upon which any real future could be built. The city glistened under the morning sun, its skyline rising like a crown of glass and steel. But despite Kaia Quinn, she was dulled by the storm still raging inside her. She walked through the streets with the weight of the letters still pressing against her heart, each step a question without an answer. She had confronted and spoken with her mother, but her fathied clarity remained as distant as ever. Forgiveness was a word that hovered in her mind, but it was tangled with anger, betrayal, and longing. A Tara Quinn brewed coffee she could not drink at the apartment, nerves frayed. She listened for the sound of Kaia's footsteps returning, afraid every day that her daughter might not come back. The confrontation had opened wounds she thought long scarred, and she feared Kaia's trust was beyond repair. Still, she clung to hope with the same determination that had carried her through 18 years of solitude. Across the city, Adrian Voss was no less restless. For weeks, he had built his empire brick by brick with certainty, but now each decision felt hollow. The board was restless, the press relentless, yet none of them compared to the look in his daughter's eyes when she had used him. He had faced ruthless competitors, economic crises, even betrayal within his ranks, but nothing unsettled him like that single word, father. It was Kaia who broke the silence first. One evening, she returned home, her posture weary but her eyes resolute. Elara rose as she entered, her voice tentative. Kaia, we need to talk, Kaia interrupted, her tone calm but firm. She placed the box of letters back on the table, her fingers brushing the lid. I've thought about everything, about you, about him, about me, and I realized something. If I carry this anger forever, it will consume me. But forgiving is not the same as forgetting. I need to know if you can face what you did, not just with words, but with actions. Elara swallowed hard, nodding. I will do whatever it takes. I cannot undo the past, but I can stand with you in the present and future. Kaia's gaze softened slightly, but the edge of caution remained. Then prove it. No more secrets, no more deciding for me. If you want my forgiveness, you must trust me with the whole truth, even when it hurts. Elara nodded again, tears brimming in her eyes. I promise. The next day, Kaia reached out to Adrian. The message was short, clipped, but it carried the weight of a decision. Meet me, once last time. I need to hear everything from you. Adrian replied almost instantly, his heart pounding. Tell me where, I will be there. They met in a quiet cafe, away from the skyscrapers, at worn wooden tables, and the smell of roasted beans lingered in the air. Adrian arrived early, his hands restless as he repeatedly turned his coffee cup. When Kaia entered, the room seemed to shrink around them. She sat across from him, her expression unreadable. I don't want rehearsed lines or excuses, she said, her eyes steady. I want the truth. All of it. Why did you leave? Why didn't you fight? And why now, after all these years, do you suddenly want to be my father? Adrian's chest tightened. He had prepared answers, but under her gaze they crumbled. He spoke not as the polished CEO, but as a man stripped bare. I was young, Kaia. Younger than I should have been to hold the weight of an empire. My family despised Elara. They threatened to ruin me, to cut me off, to destroy everything I had built if I stayed with her. And I was afraid of losing the life I had been told was mine to inherit. So I chose them. I told myself it was survival, but it was cowardice. And I have regretted it every day since Kaia's eyes glistened, but she did not look away. So you left her to raise me alone. You let her suffer while you lived in luxury. Adrian nodded, his voice breaking. Yes, and it is the greatest failure of my life. I cannot change it, Kaia. I cannot give you back those years, but I can be here now. I can stand by you, not as a businessman or a Voss, but as your father,
if you will let me." Kaia leaned back, her breath trembling. She wanted to scream at him, to accuse him again, but she saw something in his face she had not expected. Not arrogance, not calculation, but genuine sorrow. A man haunted by the choices he had made. "Words are easy," she said finally, "but forgiveness requires proof. You say you want to be my father. Then show me, not with promises, but with presence. If you run again, if you let fear rule you again, I will cut you out of my life forever." Adrian leaned forward, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I will not run. Not again. You are my daughter, and I will prove it every day if I must." For the first time, Kaia believed that maybe he meant it. That night, she returned home and told her mother about the meeting. Elara listened quietly, her heart torn between relief and fear. Relief that Kaia had taken a step toward healing, fear that Adrian might still fail her again. "You're letting him in," Elara said softly. Kaia nodded. "I'm giving him a chance. But that doesn't mean I forgive him yet, or you. It means I will see if either of you can change." The days that followed were fragile, filled with tentative steps. Adrian appeared in Kaia's life in small ways. Attending her meetings, supporting her company, listening to her ideas not as a CEO, but as a father proud of his child. Elara watched with cautious eyes, torn between jealousy and hope. But forgiveness was not linear. There were nights when Kaia's anger resurfaced. She confronted her mother with the letters again, and she snapped at Adrian for his absence in her milestones. There were moments when the weight of betrayal pressed so heavily that he wanted to cut them both out forever. And yet, each time she found herself pulled back by something more profound than anger. Love, blood, the unshakable bond of family. One evening, as the three sat together for the first time in nearly 2 decades, Kaia looked at them and spoke quietly. "I don't know if I will ever be able to forgive completely, but I am willing to try, because if I don't, I will spend my life chained to the past. And I want more than that. I deserve more than that." Elara reached for her hand. Adrian placed his over hers. Silence filled the room for a moment, not with tension, but with the fragile possibility of something new. The trial of forgiveness had begun, and it would not be won in a single day or even a year. It would be fought in every choice, every conversation, every moment of honesty. But he was on the same side of the storm for the first time willing to face it together. And though the past still loomed like a shadow, the faint light of a future began to break through, fragile but real. The first hints of spring stretched across the city, softening the air with the promise of renewal. The streets were lined with budding trees, their branches heavy with blossoms that seemed to whisper of beginnings rather than endings. In a mid-transformation, Kaia, Kiara Quinn, and Adrian Voss found themselves together again, not by circumstance alone, but by choice. Kaia stood in her company's small office, sunlight spilling through the wide window. She had just concluded a call with investors, and her presentation met with enthusiasm that would have once left her elated. Yet her thoughts drifted not to profit margins or growth charts, but to the 2 people whose presence now lingered on the edges of her life. For weeks, they had been taking fragile steps toward reconciliation. Her mother with her quiet strength, her father with his unwavering attempts to prove he would not leave again. But Kaia still carried doubt, the kind that clung like a shadow even under the brightest sun. Forgiveness was not a single act. She had realized a series of choices. Each day she had to decide whether to allow love to retake root or to let bitterness reign. That evening, Elara prepared dinner in their apartment. The small kitchen smelled of rosemary and garlic, a warmth that filled the space with practiced ease, though her mind was restless. The idea of Adrian sitting at their table unsettled her still. 18 years of anger did not dissolve in weeks, and yet she could not deny the sight of him beside Kaia at meetings, watching her with pride, listening with a patience that seemed foreign to the man she once knew. The knock at the door came just as she set the plates down. Adrian stood in the hallway, not in the tailored perfection of a CEO, but in a simple jacket, his posture hesitant. Elara hesitated too, her instincts torn between closing the door and letting him in. Kaia stepped past her and smiled faintly, "Come in, Dad," she said, the words still unfamiliar on her tongue, but spoken without bitterness. Adrian's eyes softened. He entered the apartment, glancing around the modest space that had been Kaia's world. He saw the worn couch, the books stacked neatly on the shelves, the photographs of milestones he had missed. It struck him harder than any boardroom defeat. This was the life he had abandoned, the home he had forfeited. They sat at the table, then stretched before the meal began. Finally, Kaia spoke. "We can't keep circling. If we move forward, we must decide what this family will be." Elara looked down at her plate, her voice quiet. "Family is built on trust. That is what we lost. And that is what we must rebuild, if it is possible." Adrian nodded, his gaze steady. "Then let us start here, at this table, with honesty." Over dinner, they shared truths long buried. Elara spoke of her loneliness, of nights she had worked until her body broke, of the letters she had written not for Adrian but for herself, to release the grief she could not carry. Adrian listened, tears filling his eyes as he realized the depth of her suffering. He spoke too of the kind of his family, the fear that had driven him, and the regret that had haunted every success. Kaia listened to them both, her heart torn but also healing. For the first time, she saw them not as the perfect mother or the heartless father, but as human beings, flawed and wounded. She realized that forgiveness was not about erasing the pain, but about acknowledging it, carrying it together instead of alone. In the weeks that followed, Adrian's presence became more consistent. He attended Kaia's company launches, not as the CEO who could overshadow her, but as the father who applauded from the sidelines. He began to visit the apartment regularly, helping with repairs that had long been ignored, sitting with Elara in moments of uneasy but genuine conversation. The tension between them softened slowly, like ice melting in spring. Still, challenges arose. The press continued to speculate, hungry for scandal. The Voss board resisted his choices, threatening his position. Margaret Voss seethed, warning that Kaia would bring ruiny name. But Adrian no longer bowed to their threats. For the first time, he stood firm, choosing his daughter over the empire. One evening, he brought Kaia and Elara to a quiet rooftop garden above the city. The skyline glittered, the blossoms swaying gently in the breeze. He knelt before Elara, his voice unsteady but resolute. "Elara, I cannot erase the pain I caused. I cannot give back the years I stole from you. But I can give you the years to come. I want to build a life not of power, not of fear, but of love. Will you let me try, not for the sake of the past, but for the sake of the family we can still be?" Elara's breath caught, and I had only buried the dream beneath bitterness for so long. Now, hearing with sincerity, she felt the walls she had built tremble. She looked at Kaia, who stood watching with tears, looking back at Adrian. Her voice was soft, but it cried the strength of 18 years of survival. "I cannot promise forgiveness overnight, but I can promise to try. For Kaia, for us." Adrian rose, relief flooding his face. He reached for her hand, and for the first time in nearly 2 decades, she did not pull away. Kaia stepped forward, joining their hands with hers. "We are not perfect. We never will be. But maybe that's what makes us real. Maybe that's enough." The three of them stood beneath the blooming branches, the city humming around them. The storm of the past had not vanished, but they had found shelter in one another. In the month that followed, the company shed with the support of both her parents. Elara continued her work, finding strength in independence and the shared responsibility of family. Adrian faced battles within the Voss empire, but with unwavering resolve, no longer fighting for legacy alone, but for the love he had nearly lost. And though scars remained, they became reminders of survival rather than chains of sorrow. The family reborn was not one of fairy tales or perfection, but of resilience, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again. On the anniversary of Kaia's company's founding, the three stood on stage, not as symbols of scandal, but as proof that love could rise from ruin. Kaia spoke to the crowd, her voice steady, her heart full. This company was born from resilience, from the belief that broken things can still build beautiful futures. Tonight, I stand not only as a founder but as a daughter,
And I know now that family is way back to love, no matter what. No matter how fractured, applause thundered through the hall, but Kaia heard only the quiet beating of her heart, 80 and sure. She looked at her mother's proud smile, at her father's tearful gaze, and for the first time she felt whole. The rebirth of a family was not the end of their story, but its actual beginning. For in the ashes of betrayal they had found forgiveness, and in the ruins of silence they had discovered love that would endure beyond every storm.